Hi traders, this is Christian from Tribeca Trade Group, and this is I almost said Friday. This is Thursday. It is September 12th, and this is your end of day recap. So we'll talk today about the price action today, uh, a little bit of today's option activity, just kind of thoughts overall, which I do give more detailed updates to members midday about kind of what I'm thinking about risk wise and positioning. So I'll share some of those details, but I won't go into as in depth as I did earlier today. But first things first, we're almost through the week. I think this has been a really, I don't want to say difficult week, but it's been challenging, right? There's been a lot of moves going on. So, you always have to make sure that you kind of, give yourself a little bit of a break after a week like this where things are just moving so fast and it's not easy to catch all the moves, right? I mean, there's been a lot of momentum into some names that, haven't really participated in a while. And, just keep in the back of your mind, you can't catch them all, right? It's impossible to catch all these moves. And, if you survived the week and did okay, you're doing a good job. I was reading an article earlier that was sent out about how this may have really blown up some funds over the last couple weeks. These types of moves. So, and if you didn't have a great week this week so far, hang in there. It's just the way things happen. So if you had a great week, congratulations. If you didn't, don't worry about it. It's been another one of those weeks where it's pretty fast and furious, and not only have we had a lot of rotations, but we've had to juggle the ECB meeting and a lot of moves going on there macro wise, and then you also had the headlines that come out about, oh, is it the trade war going to end soon? Is it not? I don't know. That type of thing. And you can kind of get caught very easily on the wrong side of the tape. So just wanted to mention that this has not been an easy game. Even if you do have some nice winners to sit and hold. Today was a good example of that. We'll get into today's price action. Nice move off the out of the open, but again, pretty choppy price action with the S&P. And it's one of those where it's kind of a decision every day if you're holding some option positions. It's like, how much do you sell? How much do you try to ride with how much do you try to ride the winners? And it's difficult when you kind of have this go on where the market's just not steady. But flexibility is key here. I will say that. Interesting, very micro analysis here. But it looks like the market had a little bit of difficulty with 30-20, somewhere around that. You could see kind of hit there a couple times. These were pretty, this was on, the story that Bloomberg ran that don't know if there's any truth to that at all about there some type of interim trade deal that some of Trump's advisors are talking about. Who knows, right? With what goes on behind closed doors there. But I don't think, by the way, that is so far out base. I'm sure Trump's advisors are trying to convince him to some extent to get this trade war over. So anyway, I'm not going to dwell on that topic too much, but you could see, the point I was trying to make is 30-20 looks like there's some sticking. Market just didn't look like it was ready to kind of take out that level. And if you look at that level, of course, we did take out this version point of control, which is the last one. Remember, what these kind of do is give you, the version point of controls give you a sense of where a lot of buyers and sellers live. It's basically a high area of volume that hasn't been revisited, right? Where a lot of buyers and sellers have previously met up, and that becomes significant from time to time. But we don't have any more of those. So now the question is, can we break out to new highs here? And the point that I've been making, try to make today, is that we have been on a heck of a run. So don't think that things are just gonna, in my opinion, and I don't have a crystal ball, I don't know, but you have to ask yourself, what is the best risk to reward here? Do you think we're going to go up in a straight line, or do you think we're going to digest a little bit? And you kind of have to ask yourself, what do you think the higher probability is, right? Trading, and especially option trading as well, has to do a lot with probabilities. About what you think, you know, is the easier path to the way things could go. So that's S&P. I haven't really been looking at the Qs charts too much, but the Qs, finished up 40 basis points. I've been more concentrated on what's been going on with IWM. I wanted to talk a little bit about that, but same thing. Looks like the Qs kind of hesitated at the 52-week highs. So I think this IWM, which was flat today, which again, I wouldn't get discouraged by that because it's been on such a run, this IWM. So, well, I think kind of watching this, and that is the beauty of options, is that if you don't know if we're going to get a leg higher here or if that's all we're going to get for IWM, because we've stalled out. This has showed relative strength a couple times, and for when I say relative strength, like just for a couple days, and then things have kind of stalled out. So that's kind of what I'm most interested in. And how you can use options for this is you could buy a few contracts, out of the money, and if we do happen to get another leg higher in IWM, which I think would be really good for the overall market, you have some exposure in there, and this way you're not risking that much, right? If it happens to turn back and go the other way, right? This was a false breakout this day, right? This looked really good, all bunched up, and then completely fell apart in the beginning of August. But again, we're in a different month, and things change. So that's the story. Next week, keep in mind, you got a lot of things going on, again, which is what we went over in detail in the member midday video. But not only do you have a Fed meeting next week, but you also have quadruple witching next week, so that will probably add a little bit. So again, we don't get too many of these weeks anymore where they're quiet and without events. So I think this will be interesting. I've been watching a lot of IWC the last couple days. I think IWC also kind of took a break. Just being flat for the day is not a bad thing after a big run. But we'll have to see if we digest and go higher, or digest and fall back. So again, don't have to figure this all out today. But these are certainly things to keep an eye on that I'm watching. Same thing. We'll talk a little bit about bonds. They're also at a pivot area. So if you look at the long bond futures, which is /ZB, or if you want to look at TLT, first things first. This did not hold the value area, so we are now trading below value. We do have another layer of support here if you follow moving averages, which is the 50-day moving average. And we took out, a number of these downside VPOCs, but we'll see if this is going to act as some support, or if we're really going to start to, this is the weekly chart, just continue to go lower. And again, I don't have the answer for that. I'm kind of just watching for now, and we'll see if this 50-day moving average acts as some support. But and then the same thing with gold. Gold was really well bid this morning, and that gave a false move this morning. So again, these things are interesting, and that is still holding the bottom of value. Silver did the same thing, finished flat. So again, a little bit of fake moves that happened. What else? An interesting one is palladium. Kind of gives you a little bit of a risk-on feel, doesn't it? Palladium breaking out to new highs here. That's PA. There is a palladium and platinum ETF, but there's no options on them. PALL and PPLT, which is kind of frustrating because these have been. Let's do platinum as well. Had a decent day, although it didn't finish on the highs. All right, so that's kind of just some of the things that I'm watching. We'll keep it a shorter video today. With bonds. I'm really interested. I've been talking about a couple of these names, but Goldman, has already been on a decent run. But for a longer term trend, and that's why weekly chart, remember weekly chart, if I'm on that, I'm not talking about a short term move. But we'll see if this can close inside value. This was a fake out the last time it did this and retreated. We'll see if this changes anything or if it's different this time. Notice MACD has been improving along the way, now into positive territory. So that's Goldman. Also watching, I think some of the healthcare names were a little bit weak because the Democratic debate is on tonight. I think all of them are going to be on one stage, from what I understand this morning. But it seems like there's some weak hands in healthcare whenever these debates go on. But I'm watching. Bristol Myers is right at the cusp of breaking into value. I've talked about this name now a couple times, but just a couple names that I'm watching. In terms of option activity, uh, again, there's some interesting flow, but there wasn't one option trade today that I thought really compelled to make. Since this is a little bit of a shorter video, I could talk about this for a minute because we had a great question in the room today. And I won't mention what name it was, but somebody said, "Hey, there was calls in this name. What do you think? Take it?" And my response was, "Well, if you really like the name, then and you've done, some analysis, then yeah, sure." And that's kind of my view, or one of my views with option activity is if it's a name that you like and that you've done some homework on, and you see buying in a name, then I'm more compelled to take that name. Again, we see so many of these option trades a day. So many of them don't work out. There are some that definitely do. But there's definitely, again, people don't talk about the ones that don't work. They just vanish. You don't hear about them again. So it's kind of like, for me, like playing poker, right? If you're a little bit familiar with the game of poker, you know that you only want to play the best hands, and you want to be patient. So just because I see call activity in a name, now everybody's strategy is different, but for me, I don't want to trade a name just because there was an aggressive call buyer in there. It's got to be another reason for me to own that. So that's kind of how I've been, since I've been watching the tape and trading option activity. But I'll go through a couple of those names. But yeah, if it's really something that has either worked for you before in terms of a name that you've seen repetitively, or if it's a name that you've done homework. But if not, you're just kind of throwing darts, I think. Because again, we see there's, probably in a given day, there's probably about 20 or 25 names that see aggressive call activity. Now, it depending on the level of risk for the day, sometimes it's 10 to, I shouldn't say 15 to 20, maybe 10 to 30. But if it's a day where not much is going on, sometimes it's 10 to 15. If it's a day where everybody's chasing momentum and so forth, it's 25 to 30. And sometimes when there's really no appetite, again, talking about very few at a time, there's less than 10. But there's always days where there's option activity, aggressive, right? Calls being swept, that kind of thing. GT, so looking at the weekly chart, somebody bought some January calls. So again, is this a name that you think has been so beaten up? I don't know. You look at this and it's already had a nice move from the lows. So I didn't take this trade. But I think it's kind of interesting that we really haven't seen this, and for the amount of names that we've seen kind of squeeze, it's a candidate. I think a 60-cent bet going out to January, and before you take that, consider that trade. They went out to January. So if you're looking for like something to happen tomorrow, it's going to need to sit on your books for a while, considering if you're going to follow that type of a trade. Other names that saw call activity today. Yeah, there were some Microsoft weekly calls that went up, good for like maybe a day trade. It's funny because this was mentioned on CNBC, and I'm not going to mention whether or not these guys get trades right or wrong. But they said the same thing. These guys said this on CNBC, said the exact same thing 2 weeks ago, with a bunch of Microsoft weekly calls. What happened to that trade? It was a complete zero, right? So now we're talking about calls that went up next week, way far out of the money, way at 142. I think that was the same strike. So keep these things that you see on TV with a grain of salt, because again, they you know a lot of the option flow gets touted when it works. But what happens when you mention the Microsoft calls that went up exactly 2 weeks ago that were weeklies? Those were 100% loser. Now, you may have been able to scalp for 10 or 15 cents that day, but if you held it for more than a day, it was a turd. So, and they don't take any questions. Hey, what happened when you mentioned Microsoft calls 2 weeks ago? And they scrambled into a whole bunch of calls and they didn't go anywhere and expired worthless. So anyway, keep that in mind. So keep that in the back of your mind. Now, Microsoft is a great name. I like buying Microsoft on dips. Trying to chase momentum. So here's what they bought, so you could see and you could judge for yourself. A lot of open interest there too, 62,000. So it's a whole heck of a lot of open interest on that. All right, so that's it. There was a couple other names, ASML, a couple different semi names. I don't know if they were buying these because Broadcom reported earnings. You never know. But there was some Broadcom, there was some ASML that went up earlier in the day. There was a little bit of MRVL, all small orders, and ADI calls that was an outright bet that expires tomorrow. So I'll leave it there. Those were just a couple of interesting things, but to tell you, I didn't take any trades, option activity trades today. For the most part, as I said in the pre-market session, I was a net seller today, and it's funny because P&L for me did deteriorate over the session. I did not sell all my positions, but I probably took about 5 different profit targets in some names. But in hindsight, may have been a bit more wiser to sell a little bit more because I did see my P&L kind of go down throughout the session. Still had a nice profitable day today, but that's just sometimes how it works. All right, guys, we'll leave it there. Have a great night. See you tomorrow.